guys just woke up, so I'm guessing you're thinking I can't wait to hear some statistics. But we're going to try and go right through it. So instead of kind of talking to you a whole bit about GameAnalytics, I'm going to give you an idea of who we are by the scale of this benchmark. This is the largest benchmark we've ever done on the mobile gaming industry. So we covered 60,000 games across a full calendar year. We cover major genres, and the important thing about the one calendar year is that you can see all the seasonal trends. So you have graphs in here from between kind of mid-2017 to mid-2018. And we included about 3 billion devices, which to me, like 3 million mobile phones is still crazy that we get to kind of see so many people in the network and so much behavior. But yeah, let's dive right in. So, retention day one. Now, obviously, you all know why retention day one is important if you're here. And this is one of my favorite graphs to look at from this present, because you'll notice, well, there's a 25% median day one retention. For those of you who are maybe not kind of familiar with what is the median versus what is the average, the median is the actual middle point of the distribution. So if you split all your data points into like the value that is right in the middle of it, that would be the median. So the interesting thing about this graph is if you look at the top performers, retention day one is around 40%. And this is kind of holds true with industry wisdom, right? For a game to perform well, it needs to have 40% or more day one retention, that's fine. Bottom 15% of games of, I think, below 10% retention. The interesting thing is in this graph, the median is right in the middle. And that's very strange because the distribution of the industry is not an even distribution, right? It's not a bell curve. It's more like a power curve. So a few titles who do really well, and then you have a lot of titles who don't do all that well. So what this actually tells you is that retention day one, if you look at it, it will give you a lot of false positives. It will show you some games that do well in the short term, like they will do well for the first 1-2 days, but they will not necessarily do well overall. So even though it's a metric that everybody loves to use and they love to ask, what's your day one retention? And they focus less, sometimes, especially with, tappers or hyper casual games, they focus less on the long term. This actually shows you that it is important to put retention day one into context. And first of all, also, even though we spoke about 40% is, tried and true industry wisdom, it's interesting to look at this from a genre point of view. And what actually that it really differs a lot by genre. So trivia and word games, actually great retention is more like 50%, which is, whole 25%, they're like a fourth compared to the, overall rating of the entire industry. But you also have competitive genres like arcade, board games, card games. So everything that you see on there on the left, those are genres that definitely do very well and that are competitive, and where if you want to get your game noticed, you probably be at the very top. And then there are a few genres that actually do very poorly. I guess kids, education, simulation. You'll see throughout this talk that kids is pretty much to make a game for kids is pretty much the worst decision to make, so I'm not gonna keep hampering on about that, but this is where you first see it. Okay, so carrying on, to put that into context with what I mentioned, we're gonna go to retention day 7. And this is kind of similar, like you see the same top performers in general. And again, just trivia and word games, just slaying it. They do perform so much better than all of the other genres. Notice that, again, good retention varies. You have the industry wisdom, again, that tells you, well, top performing games have about 15% retention, but again, if you go back, actually some genres have 10%, and some genres, and actually a lot of genres have less than 15%. So you get an average of 15, but that doesn't really give you the whole picture, right? So if you're going for a hyper casual, hyper addictive game, you want to be actually above 15 in general. And there's actually, yeah. It's interesting because you see 5 here on this screen, but I see 15 on that one, which is really strange. So anyway, yes, the median is 5%, and like I said, the top performers have 15%. But the interesting thing is you start to see that the median moves downward, right? This means that there are more values in the bottom than there are in the top. So you start to see that compared to day 1, most games by day 7 would have separated, and the ones that really do have day 7 retention are far fewer than those that actually just have high day 1 retention. So you do start to see that power distribution. Another interesting thing that you see here is that right in the middle of the graph for top performers, there is a dip. That is generally the holidays, when you actually expect retention normally to increase because people will be at home over Christmas. It's when people start to try out more games. So you would actually probably see your retention fall a bit over the Christmas period. So for games that you launched right before that, or for builds that you launched right before that, you want to be careful and give them a bit of time in theory to see how retention performs, because over Christmas you are going to probably see lower numbers, even if your game is really good. Right, and to put this into context, we wanted to look at, of course, this is retention, I'll come back to the game, but how much do they actually also play once they are in the game? And again, the first thing we see is another interesting seasonal trend where playtime increases over the holidays, so retention goes down, more games, but when they play more time on average. Another interesting thing from this graph is that the seasonal trend is only in the top performers. It's not in the bottom performers as much. So if people don't like, they will not play it just because they have more time on their hands. Like if you're hoping that the holidays will come and I'll get more players and I'm going to see what's up and people are maybe going to return, no, they're not. People are going to go back to the games they love anyway. So it's quite a significant difference. And also, playtimes tend to be very high, or my perception for this as an industry average is that 12 to 15 minutes % was quite high. But there is, again, a very interesting difference by genre. And this is one of the highest differences that we see, where you see that some games, casino and card games, and there's also a lot of overlap between those, they have really high session lengths. So they have session lengths of over 30 minutes. Whereas, and then there's another group of genres like what I call core-like genres, like casual education, multiplayer puzzles. People play with their friends, or games that they can spend a lot more time in. And then hyper-casual genres across the board have lower session length. And the interesting thing about session length is this is not generally higher session length as a rule, but depending on the style of game, people will only spend so much time in your game, right? It's very rare that any of us play a tapper for 30 minutes. You would play it during your commute. You would play, it will be a snackable experience. This kind of aligns with that depending on the genre of games, what is a high session length is very different. And you can't really take the industry average to necessarily be meaningful for your game. You put it into context of what your genre is. And the combined, so a metric that I look at as the combined value, good to measure kind of everything in one go is stickiness. And the reason I like stickiness is when stickiness, it's also called the DAO to MAU ratio. When stickiness is 1, it means if you had 100 players today, all of these 100 players were also here every day for the past 30 days, and only they were here. So it means that the ratio between today's players and your monthly uniques is, that would make it 1. So stickiness tells you, out of all the people that you brought in the past 30 days, how many are playing today? Right, and I find it to be a very useful metric because a lot of the time with retention, you focus on, okay, retention day 7, day 1, day whatever, but at the end of the day, how many people do you still have today out of all the people that you into your game, this month? And stickiness tells you exactly that. And interestingly, stickiness is most similar to retention day 7. when I kind of first looked at stickiness, I was expecting it to be more to retention day 28 or day 30. But obviously, when you think about it, it makes sense that it's similar to day 7, because what it really tells you is that, games that are repeatable in nature, that you play either on your weekend, those are the games that generally tend to have high stickiness that you tend to go back to. If a game does not reach those patterns and it does not get like a 1-to-5, 1-to-7 ratio of players that come back, it's not a very addictive game, and you're going to be dropping people too fast to make it profitable. Another interesting thing is I did a similar talk to this last year on the stats that we had then. And overall stickiness was actually lower in top performers. It was 14-16%, and now it's gone up to 20%. So there's a question of why is that? Did the composition of games that we measure change? Did the composition of the industry change? My explanation for this is that there is now a very high volume of games that are highly addictive, right? Because I think we are seeing in stickiness the rise of high as well, where you get games that are very addictive, have great day 1, day 7 retention, and they impact as a whole the whole industry because they have so much volume of players. However, stickiness for the worst games is the same. So some people win, people didn't, and yeah, it's interesting to see that kind of the industry is going upwards, not necessarily going downwards. Okay, so this kind of shows the comparison between stickiness and retention, that they're almost the same. And again, trivia and word games are killing it, kind of casual-like games doing super well. So the same games perform on retention: board, card, casino, puzzle, and so on. Now, I'm guessing the question is, okay, this is people coming back into the game, these are the more competitive genres, but what does this mean for your studio's revenue and for your studio's bottom line? Okay, I wanted to look a bit at ARPU and ARPDAU. I'm not sure if you guys can see the numbers on here very well, but essentially high ARPU is somewhere between $25, $30. That is what kind of top performing ARPU is, and top performing DAU is between 15 cents, 18 cents. Now, the interesting thing that I found here is that if you actually compare these two and you assume that the top performers would be the same, you would need an 0.7% conversion to get from one to the other. And I personally thought that's quite low. I mean, I would expect the top performer to have conversion that in 0.7%. So I thought, well, what does that mean? Why does that happen? And I looked at yearly conversion. I thought that can be the top conversion, and actually, it's top conversion is between 1% and 1.2%. And the takeaway for that, for me, is that not necessarily all games that are good at converting are not necessarily actually the games that earn the most, which is an interesting insight. But yes, top conversion is above 1%. And again, top ARPU games, they are not always the top converters, but we'll go a bit into that by genre, and we'll look at when does it apply, when does it not. But I guess my essential takeaway from this is that you can have a strategy that is based on whales, so you maybe don't have to be as great at converting, as long as when people convert a lot of money. Or you can have a strategy that is based on microtransactions. But all of this is highly dependent on the genre that you choose. And these are some of the more interesting genre differences that we have in the presentation. So probably unsurprisingly, the games that perform best and that actually have great ARPU and ARPDAU are RPG and strategy. So core games that are highly dependent on monetization, where people tend to spend fairly high amounts. But the interesting thing when you compare the two graphs is, whereas with ARPU, most of the genres kind of have respectable performance relative to casino, RPG, and strategy, which are the ones that are very top. With ARPDAU, it's far more skewed. It's like RPG and strategy and everybody else, right? So I wanted to look a bit more into that, and I wanted to kind of put conversion, to have conversion as of a contrast to see why is ARPDAU low. Is it because these games are not converting at the same rate? And why is it that more games have performers in ARPU than have top performers in ARPDAU? And conversion paints some of this picture where you see that conversion is almost like a transition graph between the two. It kind of shows that strategy again do well, not as well perhaps compared to relative to the others as ARPDAU, but you can see that most genres still are in the 1% almost or close to 1% ratio that would require needed for top performers. So I felt that this was still kind of I don't know, not enough to explain the difference between the two. So I came up with my own explanation, I guess, because sometimes the numbers don't tell you anything or don't tell you everything. And my explanation for this is that what we're looking at here is actually the difference between IAP-only games and genres that monetize more with ads as well. So you would see strategy would be genres that generally are IAP driven. They would have maybe some rewarded video, but they would probably not have a strategy that is very dependent on ads, not to the same level as casual games. Whereas, however, when there are games that want to monetize using IAP, they can have solid ARPU and solid conversion. So it is possible to monetize that way. But for the majority of games, they use a combined strategy that is part ads, part in-app purchase, and that's where you kind of see the gap where in all the casual genres or casual-like or hyper-casual-like genres, ARPDAU is very low because the earnings that you have just from in-app purchase paint only, I guess, half of the picture. It doesn't mean that all the genres are not making money for their users, just that in-app purchases do not capture all the money. And I would actually love to give you some ad statistics, but we don't have that invitation. We're going to work on a follow-up later this year, and we're going to look a bit more into that. But generally, my takeaway from this is that it's still, in terms of monetization, some genres are still going strong with IAP. As you can see that there is a shift across the whole genre to more complex way of monetizing or to mixed levels of monetization. And we're almost done. So overall takeaways, a genre that performs well across everything, casino games. So if you want to make money first and follow your passion later, probably casino games are a great bet to start kind of make a very profitable game. People are highly engaged. They have the highest session lengths. They have some of the highest retention. They have some of the highest in-app spend. Definitely, it's a good genre for monetizing. Do you want to make games that people really love coming back to, even though you may earn less per player, but where you can go with a volume strategy? You can go for word or trivia games. Retention is through the roof. ARPDAU is generally lower, but you can go for volume and still, have a minnow strategy, make less money per player, but serve a ton of players. If you really want to have a game that is very complex, the game that you yourself love to play, you can go for strategy or RPG. They are hard genres. In volume, they are lower than other genres, but when you get it right there, the reward is very high. It's a very high risk, high reward strategy. High risk, high reward strategy. It's generally low retention. People come back to your game, but if you do get a set of highly engaged gamers, they will probably spend a lot of money in your game to keep their community going. But if you do want to make just kind of a general, well-rounded game, start off applying industry best, then a casual arcade puzzle game is probably like a good compromise between I don't want to make a casino game, but I don't want to make a game super fancy kind of strategy game either. So definitely that would be a great pick. Yeah, that's it for me. Do we get Q&A?
You can get one Q&A. That's cool. Thank you
have
very
questions?
much. Can you get a round of applause, please? Thank you. Click on pictures here. So, is there any? There's a lot of comprehensive stats and data there. Is there any questions? There's a gentleman there. Looks familiar.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Do you have the annual? Are those like global, or is it like, do those vary country by country? For example, the dip after Christmas period. You said that there's like annual dips and changes.
Yes.
Are those global trends, or is it in Asia they are not as big as in Europe, or for example?
So I think I mentioned that the proportion of players that we have from Asia in this study is about 20%. Yes, do have. I mean, obviously, we actually have a benchmark on China only. If you go to the GameAnalytics website, it's there in our resources page. But yes, over there, the trend shifts, and it's related to Chinese New Year, and much less to Western holidays. However, this is across our entire network. So at a global level, it seems that the Western holiday trend kind of drowns out a bit, like the Christian holiday trend kind of drowns out the Asian trend a bit. Our distribution or our coverage is better overall in North America and in Europe, so that is another explanation. So that's about like 50% versus 20% in Asia, right? So you would see the impact.